This is our set of lightning talks, so they're a bit different. Our speakers will just speak for 5 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes of Q&A. Our first speaker today is Christopher Howell. He is an adjunct assistant professor of religious studies at Elon University. He holds a PhD in religion from Duke University, and his areas of research include American religion, religion and science, and Eastern Orthodoxy. His first book is an upcoming history of the intelligent design movement, and he will be talking today on human or machine cosmos, Lewis Mumford in dialogue with Stanley Kubrick and Terrence Malick. And I just have to say, happy Thanksgiving. I hope this is not disrupting your turkey.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know it's not Thanksgiving there, but I'll reverse it, and happy Thanksgiving to those of you there as well. So should I go ahead and start?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this will be very fast. We'll see if fly through this topic here. So I was thinking about comparing these movies done by these two famous directors. And so the premise to kind of start with is a somewhat out of fashion thinker, Lewis Mumford, who was a critical for environmental studies, urban planning, architecture, and history and philosophy of technology. And in his famous, he had a duology of books that were quite well known in the 60s and 70s called The Myth of the Machine. And in those books, Mumford was really critical of this idea of the tool user view of humanity, or the homo faber, that this is what makes us distinct, is our usage of tools. It's advanced in the Bergson or Hannah Arendt. And Mumford was highly skeptical of that approach to understanding humanity. And he thought instead we should be better seen as homo symbolicus, the language user, symbol user, the creatures that participate in rituals, imagination, and religion. And that this was a better way to understand us. And I thought it was interesting because this dichotomy is really on display in the movies 2001: A Space Odyssey and The Tree of Life. I think they kind of operate on each side of the spectrum of what he was criticizing and supporting. And these two movies were linked together by Roger Ebert not long before he died, where he reviewed The Tree of Life. He said that the only movie that had this sort of cosmic scale of history and consciousness and humanity was 2001. It's the two of them. They're the ones that have the biggest sense of scale. So it seemed natural to compare them. So we'll start with 2001 quickly. This really, if those of you who've seen it, you know, these are arty movies, they're somewhat inaccessible, but what it really is advancing is this kind of primacy of the tool. That the most important thing in human evolution was discovery of the tool. The famous scene of the apes in the bottom right, where he discovers how to use a bone as a club, and it changes everything. They're able to use it as a weapon. They can defend themselves. The club evolves into a pen, evolves into spacecraft, and it goes out into space. And then eventually the artificial intelligence, HAL 9000, famous villain in film history. So it shows that technology can be useful, the tools can be useful, but they can also be a threat. And the way to overcome that threat possibly is to defeat HAL, and then the future of humanity, where the astronaut on the top, Dave Bowman, basically transcends into a post-human star child, which you can see in this top right of the screen. And it's significant that this Richard Strauss's intro to Thus Spake Zarathustra plays both in the beginning and the ending of the movie, which is signifying this sort of Ubermensch, Overman. Zarathustra comes down from the mountain to announce his message of the Superman. And so that song is being played in both the beginning and end of the movie. Mumford saw the movie and he actually criticized, he liked it, but he talked about how HAL he viewed was a villain because he didn't have cultural safeguards. He was a machine, a tool, but he didn't have the moral conscience that humans would. You know, I'm not sure I'm totally on board with his reading of it, but that was his understanding of the movie. Now, before, I don't want to throw too many movies in there, but before we get to Tree of Life, I did want to do a little interlude with Solaris, since it was sort of a religious refutation of 2001. Andrei Tarkovsky, the Russian director, really didn't like 2001. He thought it was kind of anti-human in a lot of ways. So he depicted a different kind of movie where these astronauts encounter a planet with a sentient ocean, and the planet can't communicate to them. It's not able to use language because it doesn't have the ability to do it, so it struggles to communicate. And I think he was really trying to emphasize maybe the opposite side of 2001, that the importance of language, something that really is needed. 2001 really made language incidental. The novel by Arthur C. Clarke makes it language an incidental evolution after the tool. But in Solaris, it centers it. And one of the characters in Solaris at one point mentions them. We have no interest in conquering any cosmos. We don't know what to do with other worlds. We don't need other worlds. We need a mirror. And so my interpretation of that is that we need to look inward, that what matters in the cosmos, trying to understand ourselves maybe more than trying to understand what's outside of us. Maybe, priority. So that takes me to the Tree of Life, which I think tries to turn this mirror in on ourselves. Like 2001, it is difficult and somewhat inaccessible. It tells the story of a family in Texas and the tension between father and mother and son. Interspersed within this story is the creation of the universe, the destruction of the universe, and dinosaurs and evolution of all humanity. And this movie really centers the primacy of language. It features a lot of voiceovers, asking God questions, asking where he is during times of suffering. The voice from the whirlwind is a sequence in the beginning where God is questioned, like in Job, where he is during violence and suffering, and is answered with this cosmic depiction of the universe that not only has music, but actually has the Lacrimosa being sung during it. So the creation of the universe is having a soundtrack of Mary watching Jesus be crucified. And the movie also has a little bit of skepticism about tools and technology. It depicts usage of DDT that was popular in the 50s and 60s before Rachel Carson's Silent Spring showed how bad it was and its launching of the environmental movement. At one point, the kids are playing around and they are doing terrible, destructive things to nature. They tie a frog to a toy rocket and shoot it up into space, and then they justify it by saying it's an experiment. So therefore, it's, you can justify anything as long as it's an experiment. And the ethics that the movie is really criticizing is this idea of can't say I can, which is something the overbearing father always says, that you can't, this is how you get ahead in the world, can't tell me I can't. And through all of this, it threads this story of humanity at the beginning and at the end of time, and the movie ends with a resurrection sequence. So you can see a total different kind of anthropology that fits into these. One is highly religious in Tree of Life, and one is highly secular humanist in 2001. And so to conclude, I thought there was kind of an interesting connection, something happened recently. Mumford, in his books, he was critical of Arthur C. Clarke. He was critical of space travel, something he thought was extraordinarily expensive and possibly diverting from important ecological problems on Earth. And sometimes his skepticism seemed a little bit extreme to me in some regards, but recently when William Shatner went to space on the Amazon rocket, he kind of said a lot of the things Mumford did. Mumford was saying he felt it's inhuman, you have to be in embryonic state with a astronaut suit, you have to eat paste, all these things that are seemingly non-desirable, when we have life already. And Shatner kind of confirmed a little bit of that, saying when he was up in space, he looked in the opposite direction, there was no mystery, no majestic awe to behold. All I saw was death. Everything I had thought was wrong. Everything I had expected to see was wrong. It was among the strongest feelings of grief I've ever encountered. The contrast between the vicious coldness of space and the warm nurturing of Earth below filled me with overwhelming sadness, which maybe is not what we would have expected from Captain Kirk. But this is nevertheless what he said when he went up there. And so that kind of concludes what I was wanting to talk about, this sort of comparison and maybe a fruitful way forward. I'd be interested in your thoughts on how to develop this into an article or chapter or longer talk or something. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Yeah, it is a bit of a whirlwind, that 5 minutes, but you did it very, very well. Look, I've got one question already on the Slido. It's from Doru Kostake. He says, Chris, tell us more of the symbolic culture. It sounds like the archaic cultures where all things connected with all things, tools, art, writing, religion.
I'm not 100% sure how to respond. I mean, like a holistic kind of primitive culture where these things aren't necessarily divided from each other. If that's kind of where it's going. I mean, so for Mumford's idea, he thought tools were incredibly important, of course. And I think the thing he's critical of is that in overemphasizing tools and technology is making us different. The novel 2001 treats it as though language is a sort of like spandrel almost, or like an accretion of things that happen just because technology was invented first, and that protected us and allowed us to develop as a species where we could defend ourselves. And then art could come in, and then language could come in, and then symbolism could come in. That's the way it's depicted in the movie and in the book. And I think Mumford was really critical of that because it just seems like it overlooks most of what's important in our experience as humans. I think the movie kind of shows us a little bit where it jumps from the bone in the first scene to when they go into space, that one of the first tools you see after the spaceship is a pen. And what do you do with a pen? You write with it. But the idea that that is an achievement that took thousands of years for us to achieve is sort of overlooked as sort of like, it was just a thing that happened. And not that that might be one of the most important things in our history. And so I do think, I mean, he might go a little too far in trying to denigrate tool using too much, but I do think it is important to see him talk about the usage of language.
Yeah, but perhaps it's the idea of, integrating tool making and tool using into this broader, let's call it, narrative of the human experience, where they mean more than, the immediate usefulness that we might ascribe to them.
Yeah, I think he would 100% agree with that. And the thing that he said set him apart in his histories of humanity was essentially that he wanted to make our sole purpose isn't just invention for the sake of invention, but like science and technology and knowledge are good insofar as they make it easier to be human, that they serve us in a way. And if we get in a situation where we're endangered, or like with Howell, the computer who turns violent, or needing to not be human in order to create or pursue our technology, then we're really not in a good situation. And one could argue that in a lot of our economic, social, industrial situations right now, we find ourselves in that situation quite often.
Great. Thank you. Now we've got a question from Neil Bergman, who says, are all movie futures dystopian, or do we just enjoy the conflict?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are. I think that reflects a lot of our anxiety, right, in the post-World War II world. Once nuclear weapons are created, a lot of future stories are pretty apocalyptic. But we have utopias also. Off the top of my head, I'm having a hard time thinking of one immediately. The ones that stand out tend to be the dystopias. But Tree of Life isn't dystopian in its view of the future. It does show the Earth being destroyed, but only not by like technology or anything, but just as the end of its natural life cycle, where the sun explodes after 4 billion years and consumes the Earth. But that's not the end of the movie. It actually shows the resurrection, and it shows everyone meeting again on a beach. The people who have died and have been separated from each other are reunited. It's actually a very beautiful scene called The Shore of Eternity that comes at the end of Tree of Life. So I wouldn't say that's a utopia, but it's not a dystopia. It is an attempt, I think, to update Job with a sort of Christian idea that resurrection is the end, not replacing people with like different children, but bringing your own children back. The death of the son is one of the main conflicts in the movie that occasions a lot of existential doubt. And so when the son resurrects at the end, it presents the sort of Christian resurrection.
Yeah. I've got a question from someone who wants to remain anonymous. What of homo adorans? That what makes us authentically human is worship. Does this offer a way of integrating tools and symbols? Mumford's reflection on this with a question mark. I'm not sure whether you're seeing those questions written or not.
I don't see them. That is interesting. I've never heard that phrase used before, so I have to think about that. I'm wondering how tools are integrated into worship. Would maybe be kind of a question I would ask back. But of course, like if we're thinking about like tools using it to create icons or something, or music or something, sort of tools that we use to communicate, I think that definitely would be an integrator, because then the tools are serving our human purpose in that capacity, right? And in that case, they're good because they can help us flourish more authentically as spiritual beings, right? That would make them definitely a good thing for us. Yeah, the thing with Mumford, he's not against technology, and I didn't want to make it seem like I am either. He's more concerned about the way it's used and how it affects us. He's not a Luddite who wants to go live in the cabin in the woods and never see people again.
Yep. This is a good question. Someone has said that humans are the storytelling apes. So what do you see as the most Christian way of telling stories, imaging alternate possible futures?
Yeah, man, that's that's a hard one to answer in such a short amount of time.
I should say that was from Richard Lee, that question.
Oh, yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I do think the Tree of Life really captures that. Tarkovsky's films do. I talked about Solaris a little bit as well, which depicts the future, because it so much science fiction, I think. I love science fiction, I don't want to get anyone wrong, but so much science fiction actually is kind of thin on characters and big on like the concepts and some of the technology and some of the very creative imagining of space travel and what it would be like and so on. But when you do science fiction like Solaris, or like Tree of Life, not really sci-fi, but you know, a future, and it centers humanity in it and our spiritual lives and our questions that we have now, I think is an authentically Christian way to do that. That was the concern that Tarkovsky had with 2001, is he felt that it didn't really capture a very real sense of humanity. It really, the most human character is Hal. When he's dying, he's afraid, and he's afraid of dying, and that is like one of the most shocking emotional scenes in the movie. The humans kind of behave like robots, and so I think storytelling that retains our human capacity like that, our character and our questions and concerns that are perennially valid, is how to write stuff like that.
Okay. Look, I just want to say thank you, Chris. Could you join me in thanking Chris? This is a